Everyone. Bonjour, Annie. Obviously, I want to thank Rethink Greening, Citizens Climate Lobby, the Coalition for Livable Sudbury, and obviously GreenPack for organizing again this event. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Tigmishing and Anishinaabe First Nations with the Wanapete First Nations and Tigmishing and Métis people, as acknowledged earlier. I'm looking forward to tonight, but also, many of you are no strangers in the room here. We've had regular meetings, attended rallies, we've contacted my office and obviously want to continue the climate emergency debate and look at specific solutions and specific legislation. So looking forward to the questions tonight. Obviously, as an MP, working closely with municipal government and mayors, Greater Sudbury and West Nipissing that both declare a climate emergency was really important to do. So obviously, as an outdoor with my wife, with the kayaking and fishing and the outdoors, like many of you that are here tonight, it's really important that we continue and not just continue, but obviously enhance and build upon what we've already started. So I'm looking forward to the ideas tonight. Again, I want to thank you for the last 6 years for bringing your concerns and being your voice in Ottawa to make sure that we together make a difference. So I'm looking forward to the questions. I'm open to kind of the format is a bit different here, but that's okay. That's good. So Evan, I'm not sure if there's anything else. I wanted to be brief so we could dive into the questions.
Yeah, well, thanks for those opening remarks and getting us started this evening. So the first all set of questions are going to pertain to different particular bills and policies. So we're going to start out by looking at C12, which is the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And we know that this bill requires setting national targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada with the objective of attaining net zero emissions by the year 2050. And we know that the targets are to be set by the Minister of the Environment for their 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045. So this bill is passed and is now the law of the land. And we have three kind of specific questions that we're going to dig a little bit deeper into this bill. So if you want to just go ahead to advance the next slide, please. The questions we'd like you to address, Mark, are one, to defend how your party voted on this bill, C12, how you voted, and how you could have made the policy better if you could.
Thank you, Evan. Obviously, C12 is a cornerstone of the Liberal plan that we've put forward. I'll go briefly here to the questions and I'll dive into more of the specifics. Obviously, I voted in favor, not only voted in favor, but been active with the Environment Committee. I've been active with Minister Wilkinson and active with some of you on the call here to bring some of that feedback back to the bill to enhance the bill. So from a policy perspective, what I want to do also to look at this is if you look at specifically, I'm going to be looking at the UK, what's been passed in the UK. Obviously, the UK is a bit different in Canada because all parties are fully committed. So it's a non-partisan issue. In Canada, we still have some challenges with one party, but these are one of the things. So I just want to be clear here. From 2015 to 19, we've put $60 billion towards climate action and clean growth. And in the fall, we added a $53 billion commitment to Canada's green recovery. So that's over $100 billion. So some of the we have to tax the ultra rich in order to fund climate initiatives. No, Canada's a rich country. We have the purchasing power. We have the budget, and we've already committed $100 billion to look and put in place. Obviously, making the pollution is not. So that's part of when we're looking at targets and it's really important. Part of that, which is a comprehensive price on pollution. We fought to the provinces. We fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. I want to thank the CLC, the petition that was submitted in Parliament with about 1,200 signatures to make sure we continue the price on pollution, which is very important. But when we look at the landmarks on the accountability legislation that was brought forward, this is really important that we look at moving this forward. Additional to that, as Parliamentary Secretary of Natural Resources, we've added some other initiatives with an hydrogen strategy, clean fuel, a net zero accelerator fund. And just to give you some very close to home example, Sault Ste. Marie, there was 200 out of that fund with Algoma Steel, Martinez, $200 million. I couldn't believe how inefficient and pollutant that steel plant was. But now our government's investments in there. Also, when we look at clean tech, Canada is a world leader in clean tech. We're the second largest number of clean tech companies in the world, just behind the US. So when we look at some of these initiatives on clean tech, it's really continuing. So we have a broad range of initiatives that are part of not only C12, but also other initiatives that we put in place. And I'll just mention, we may not have a lot of time tonight, but we have, the harmful single-use plastic ban. We have protecting 30% of the oceans and land. We have the planting of 2 billion trees. We have to plant them, so that's part of the process that we're looking at moving forward. So these are some of the initiatives to get to a net zero by 2050. But also one of these elements that we look at with C12 is so critical that we put this in place. So C12, and I know I want to ask Evan how much time I have, but I'll just give you a few elements here when we say listen to the experts. You have here Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party of British Columbia, and I'll quote what he said about our plan. As a client, and I quote, as a climate scientist and someone with a background in climate policy, I've been impressed by the leadership of the government here on the environment. The climate plan he recently developed, which Minister Wilkinson introduced, is bold and thoughtful. It is the only credible plan to put forward by any party at the federal level. And this is a critical time. I mean, I have a list of other experts that have, and I welcome you to, I won't read them all tonight, but obviously, but there is a long list of that we have put a comprehensive plan in place, and C12 is very important. Yes, the minister looking at looking at the accountability measures in there, and there's been some discussion about should that be changed. So that's kind of the element of a political party, the process. Like I said earlier, we're not there yet with all the political parties. So these are important steps to take. So for me, this is now the law of the land. How can we put some, sooner targets in 2025 and then 2030? That was mentioned to me earlier. So there's a lot of elements that play into that. So maybe the last, there's a few other points, but the kind of a clean energy grid is really, really important, because right now Canada's electrification grid is 80% emission free. It's still one of the cleanest in the world, but there's more work to be done to make sure that we get up to 90+% of non-emission by 2030. So there's quite a few elements here that is part of the plan itself. And also, let's be clear, environmentalists for decades have been calling on the federal government to take action. And not only have we done the C12, but we've also invested heavily and permanently in public transit. And that's something that's been asked for in a big way by environmentalists all across the country. And I have a list here of projects that have been funding in the billions of dollars to municipalities for public transit. And parks and bike trails. So that's another element. And I'm all saying this because, there's not one set of, we have to look at a comprehensive from electrifying your grid, making sure that all electric cars are or electric by 2030. So there's a lot of different elements that come into a plan that we've put in place. So I'll leave it at that to see if there's further questions specifically on that. But from a C12 perspective, it took a while to get past the House, and I want to. It's been challenging in a minority government to get legislation. There's been a lot of there's been boycotting. There's been a filibustering of different plans or different legislations, and I could list a whole slew. But here we're talking about C12, and want to commit getting the feedback and bringing it back to the minister as we look at implementing the bill in the 44th Parliament.
Well, thank you, Mark, for such a thorough and detailed response to C12. The format is that we're going to look at another couple of policies and then some audience questions. And so we would like to get through all of that material if possible. So we're going to have to stay on time and be fair to everybody. We'll have to keep the replies to about 2 minutes per question, if you don't mind. So like I said, shifting gears here then to the next policy, looking at C15. This is about enshrining the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People under national law. And there's a statement there from UNDRIP that states Indigenous peoples have the right to the conservation and protection of the environment and the productive capacity of their lands or territories and resources. So that bill is passed. That is now the law of the land. And we have the same 3 questions about the last policy applying to this policy, basically looking at how you voted and how you could perhaps make the policy better and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Obviously, the United Declaration of Indigenous Rights is probably 15 years that should have been implemented long time ago. I'm part of the Indigenous Caucus. We work directly with the minister and Minister of Justice also to ensure that this was a government bill in this Parliament. And the reason I'm saying the government bill, because the last bill was a private member's bill, and private members' bills don't get priority in Parliament as a government bill. And as I want to thank the Fridays for students for several of the rallies urging us to get this bill passed. We all know that in the last Parliament, the Conservative Senate quashed this bill, which was horrendous to be doing. So now this is the law of the land, as you indicated, and now we're looking at how do we incorporate this to the reconciliation, and then clearly from a natural resources perspective, environment, and building larger projects. I hear it all the time now. Indigenous communities, First Nations communities are invited to the table at the beginning of a project, not at the end. And Natural Resources Canada, for example, has a whole department of Indigenous staff, experts that work with the proponents to make sure that the proponents from any project that they started to submit applications to the government, that Indigenous communities are consulted, engaged in a partnership right at the beginning. So this is crucial, and obviously, you see a lot of support here, and we need to make sure, and this is part of not only reconciliation, but also part of self-government for First Nations. We need to make sure that they have the financial resources moving forward for independence and self-government. Did I keep it at 2 minutes there, Evan?
Yeah, yes, you did. Thank you so much. Okay, well, let's go ahead then and shift our focus to C230, which is the next policy that we'll be talking about a little bit. I want to advance the next slide there. There we go. So C230, the National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act, says that environmental racism describes the disproportionate toxic exposure and harms experienced by racialized communities that result from government and corporate decisions on where to place polluting industrial facilities, refineries, mines, landfills, incinerators, among others. So this private member's bill would develop a national strategy to redress the harm caused by environmental racism. It has passed the second reading, but has not become the law. So just like the other two previous policies, if we advance to the next slide, got a couple questions for you there about how you could make the policy better and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. And I had the opportunity to talk to my colleague Lenore in Cumberland, Colchester. Obviously, this bill, as a private member's bill, and this parliament will have to be reintroduced in the next one. I did vote in favor of C 230, because it really addresses the systematic inequalities. When we look at increasing awareness of different aspects of racism, including environmental dimension, that's something that's not necessarily in place. So this is something that we looked at. I talked to the minister over C12 if there's an opportunity to kind of incorporate committee work. So here, obviously, the bill here, there's really three sets of issues that the government is looking at discussing, studying, and considering the amendments. So we're looking at adding environmental justice to the bill. Environmental justice has been defined by fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, and income. Also modifying or removing measures that will impact federal provincial relations, because that's the challenge that we have sometimes here in Canada. But some measures proposed in the bills are appropriately taken by some of the provinces. So that's why, there is that kind of recognition of jurisdiction, and the protection of environment is shared by both levels of government. So collaboration on this, the province is really key. And obviously the last point is providing flexibility and development of the strategy. So obviously the bill here, everyone deserves a voice for greener tomorrow, and this bill, I've talked to Leona, and obviously reintroducing it as a private member's bill, but also I have tried and I will continue and hopefully in the 44th Parliament to see if this could be part of a government bill also.
Thank you. So for our fourth question, we do shift the focus a little bit to your climate policy, and I think for the sake of time, instead of like going through each question in a strict order, why don't I just kind of make an executive decision here and kind of change it up a little bit and just say, maybe you could use the time on this point to just, are there any main features that you really want to highlight for the audience here this evening? What are some of the main features of your climate policy?
Well, I started to address some of them earlier. I just want to make sure that and your question that you had earlier in the emails for tonight, what kind of bills would you support to prioritize the climate lobby, and obviously hearing from the students, hearing from the groups that are here tonight. And C12 is how can we enhance, obviously clear targets. The 5 years is something, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to dive in a bit more on that aspect of it. And also if there's elements, as I said, like the UK plan in Parliament, to see how can we make it a bit more accountable. So for me, enhancing, the carbon pricing is very, very important. We got to continue with the plan that's in place, which is it's been recognized as one of the best in the world. More comprehensive on that. And I want to make sure that maybe the last point on this is in January 2021, I held a circular economy session and want to continue. I know the Rethink Green has been actively involved in circular economy, and I think it's really important that we look at the mining, the forestry, the health. And I know when we look at health-related anesthetic gas use of Canada, I've had the opportunity to, have briefings on this, and anesthesia and greenhouse gas emissions are so important. There's a big component in the health sector that we're not talking about when we're looking at the environment, and we're looking at net zero emissions to 2050. So I would like to make sure, and I guess to your point, Evan, to the audience, we need to work more closely on the health side, because it's a climate emergency, it is the environment, but there's a huge health cost that we're not talking about. And that's something I'd like. I know health hospitals is a provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government could play a role there as we move forward. So I just wanted to mention that aspect, to be able to bring that feedback, and to see how can I bring that. I've heard clearly, even on the environment side, childcare is so important, because if you get more women to work, more women in the workplace, you will see a difference on the environment. Women are leading and on the environmental side. So a childcare policy is crucial in this element. And I've heard it as chair of the Parliamericas, Latin American countries. I've had the opportunity to look at the gender lens, Status of Women Committee, and I know, and we have the youth, the leadership, and that equality, and having more women in the workforce because of childcare in place is going to be better for the environment. So I just wanted to make sure that that's there, as one of the policies. So hopefully I fit into that 2 minutes there, Evan, before you.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks. So we have 2 minutes for the next two ones as well. And so this is where we shift gears, and these are audience questions that have been submitted, as Rebecca mentioned, through the social media platforms earlier. So the first question then refers to Wolf Lake Old Growth Red Pine Forest and how it's under threat from mining exploration. And it also links in the idea of the Laurentian University green space and how that's one of the most important community green spaces in Sudbury and essential to the watershed, the lake, and drinking water health, but it's at risk from the insolvency at LU. So the specific question then related to those two topics is, will you commit to protecting these green spaces? And then if so, what actions will you take to do so? So 2 minutes on that one. Then we have another audience question of 2 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Evan. Obviously, too important. The Wolf Lake, we've had conversations in the past, and there's the environmental logging and a lot of the environmental that's being put in place right now is provincial. But what the federal government has a role is to protecting, and when we're looking at parks, when we're looking at lands, we do have, we're ahead, that I don't have the exact number of where we're at for protecting lands, but I'm committing to seeing how can we incorporate Wolf Lake into that protection from a federal perspective. It has not been done, but most of that has been more on the provincial regulatory side of things. So I'm being upfront. The only thing that we would have federally, but it's something that I haven't been actively involved in the past. Obviously, the greening space in Laurentian, I mean, like many of you that are on the call here tonight, I've biked, I've walked, I've hiked the Laurentian trails, and there's no, the insolvency crisis that Laurentian has thrust out upon the community is unacceptable. And we could look at the issue of federal and provincial jurisdictions, but at this case, I've already worked with call the mayor, call councilors. If there's anything that we could do to try and get the lands to the city, would be one way, because then the federal government could then provide some support to the city. Laurentian University cannot sell this. We have to find ways to make these protected lands. This is unacceptable that this is even being considered. So I have actively been asking Environment in Ottawa if there are any provisions that we have. So far, have not been successful. It is in court, and which is usually challenging. But I commit to continuing to see what we could do. But we have the only right now path that I'm seeing forward is how can we get the city of Sudbury or another organization to see how can they apply for funding, because from a federal perspective with the provinces is the lead on this, and we cannot go without the province's consent on this. But if there's a way to bypass this with the city, then looking forward to trying to see what we could do. But it's very traumatic for the community, and I talked to residents, and it is challenging. So thank you.
All right. Well, we have one final audience question for you, and that's looking at basically small businesses, the local economy, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you don't mind just sharing maybe like 2 or 3 points with us on what are some practical things perhaps that you could do to help 2005 in the post-pandemic economic recovery period that we're entering here, and doing so in a way that's respectful of the low carbon economy.
Yeah, well, our government has already put quite a few measures. Obviously, 80% of the funding for COVID-related pandemic in Ontario has been with the federal government. So we provided support to schools, looking at quality of air in the schools, nursing homes also made announcements, St. Joseph's and St. Gabriel on the nursing home side. There's also a retrofit program that we've launched to help home users. And so it's not necessarily on the business side, but the home users. So there's a number of initiatives there. Obviously, the wage subsidy and the rent has been there for businesses, but also some of the clean tech. And I didn't get a chance to list all of the clean tech and some of the funds that we have. So I encourage to contact my office. But we are looking at part of the infrastructure. And one of the things I'm committing, and I have committed, is to ensure that any infrastructure dollars that are spent, that we make sure that there is provisions to make sure that the building has net zero, and how can we finance that to support. And I'll give you the example. Just recently, Coniston, a seniors home, 55 units, we added additional dollars to make sure that the building is net zero and energy efficiency. So there is that element. We've also provided dollars to the municipality to get some of their buildings net zero. I strongly believe that the federal government should play a bigger role with local municipalities in many ways. And this would be a good example, because we all know the train wreck that the Ford government has provided here on their environmental policies, and we have to find ways to support local organizations, local businesses better.
Right on time there, Mark. Thanks so much. So just as a closing, couple of closing words, I'll just say thank you for participating this evening, and thank you for respecting the time limits. And you are, of course, more than welcome to stay on the session for the remainder of it as we hear from the other candidates. So thank you for participating. And I believe our next session was a pre-recorded. Is that correct? We've got yes. Craig coming up next.
That's correct. So we're just switching over to, unfortunately, Craig was called into work this evening. So he was able to join us this afternoon for a pre-recorded session to answer his questions. Unfortunately, the schedule didn't work out for Evan to be there. So it's me asking the questions on the video. So slightly different style, but still the same questions. And here's our green. So our next candidate is Craig Gravel, running for the Green Party of Canada in the riding of Nickel Belt. Welcome, Craig, and please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to some questions.
Thank you for having me. My name is Craig Gravel. I am the Green Party of Canada candidate running in Nickel Belt. I'm 24 years old. I'm a recent college graduate. I've been working in kitchens now for about 6 years. And the reason why I decided to run as a candidate for the Green Party of Canada is to run on progressive policies, as well as policies that will address and solve many of the problems that we are facing, especially when it comes to the climate crisis and other issues as well.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So we're going to ask you about some of those policies. The first policy question is about Bill